America is a place of contradictions, a land where dreams are born and broken, where wealth can rise from nothing, and where power often wears the mask of celebrity. But within this story, one name has come to embody both the promise and the peril of the American experiment: Donald John Trump. To some, he is a savior, a warrior against the so-called deep state, a voice for the forgotten. To others, he is the villain of a democracy unraveling, a dangerous man who turned politics into spectacle. But no matter where you stand, one truth is unavoidable. Donald Trump is a story America cannot stop telling. And maybe that's because his story is not just about him. It is about us. Our hunger for wealth, our obsession with fame, our willingness to be seduced by the glitter of success, even when the cost is hidden in shadows. Trump's life is a stage play of ambition, the rise of a boy from Queens, the golden towers of Manhattan, the roar of casinos, the bright lights of reality TV, and finally, the White House itself. Few men in history have lived a life so public, so scrutinized, so entangled in the myth of America. But to understand Trump, to really understand him, we cannot begin in the chaos of his presidency. We must go back further, back to the roots of a family who arrived from Germany and Scotland, chasing the American dream in the ashes of poverty and war. Back to the soil of Queens, New York, where a boy watched his father build houses and learned that survival in America was not about kindness, but about winning. Because in Trump's world, you either win or you lose. There is no middle ground. This is not a simple biography. This is a journey into the making of an icon, a brand, a political earthquake. We will walk through gilded ballrooms and courtrooms, through bankruptcies and boardrooms, through rallies that shook the ground like rock concerts, and into a presidency that fractured America's soul. And as we do, one question will haunt us at every turn. Did Donald Trump shape America? Or did America shape Donald Trump? This is his story. And in some ways, it is also ours. The year is 1946. World War II has ended, and America is stepping into its golden age. In the quiet streets of Queens, a child is born into the Trump family. His father, Fred Trump, is already a wealthy real estate developer. Not from Wall Street, not from Hollywood, but from bricks, mortar, and the business of shelter. Fred believes in hard work, discipline, and above all, expansion. His creed is simple: build more, own more, control more. And this child, Donald, is watching. Watching a father who is both mentor and tyrant. A man who teaches him that toughness is survival, that emotion is weakness, and that in business, compassion is nothing but a liability. It is here, in the quiet corners of a strict household, that the foundations of Donald Trump are laid. But Donald is not content to remain in the shadow of Queens. He sees Manhattan across the river, the towering skyscrapers, the glimmer of lights, the promise of a city that crowns its kings with money and fame. For young Trump, Manhattan is not just a dream, it is destiny. And so begins the journey of a boy who would not be satisfied with houses for the working class, who would not settle for modest wealth. Donald Trump wanted his name carved into the skyline. He wanted power that could not be ignored. He wanted, above all, to be seen. To understand Donald Trump, you must first meet the man who shaped him, Fred Christ Trump. The name itself carries a strange irony, for Fred was no saint. He was a builder, a deal-maker, and above all, a survivor in a cutthroat world of post-war real estate. His kingdom was not Manhattan, with its shining towers and grand hotels, but the working-class neighborhoods of Brooklyn and Queens. Rows of modest houses, apartments built for veterans returning from war, subsidized by government programs. Fred knew how to play the system. He mastered the art of government contracts, subsidies, and loopholes. He built cheap, sold dear, and multiplied his fortune. Fred's rules were simple. Win at any cost. Be ruthless. Never show weakness. For his children, life was not about nurturing dreams, but about preparing for war, the war of business. And of all his children, one boy seemed destined to inherit that fire. Donald. Born in 1946, Donald grew up in a large family, but in many ways he stood apart. He was brash, competitive, restless. The young Trump would throw erasers across classrooms, punch through boundaries, test authority at every turn. By the time he was a teenager, his behavior was so unruly that his parents sent him away to the New York Military Academy. There, in a world of drills and discipline, Donald learned the value of command. He discovered how power works when others are forced to salute you, how rules bend for those who dare to push them, and how dominance earns respect, or at least fear. But beneath the bravado, there was something else taking root, a hunger, a deep, gnawing need to stand taller than the rest, to prove, perhaps to himself, that he was not just Fred's son, but something greater, something unforgettable. Fred's empire, while substantial, was confined to the outer boroughs, safe, predictable money. But Donald looked across the East River and saw something else. Manhattan. The skyline glittered like a promise. It wasn't just about buildings. Manhattan was about prestige, power, and visibility. If Queens was survival, Manhattan was immortality. And Donald Trump had no interest in merely surviving. By the 1970s, Donald began to step out from his father's shadow. He took his first steps into Manhattan real estate, a world dominated by old money, established names, and unspoken rules. Many thought this kid from Queens would never make it. He didn't have the pedigree, the connections, or the polish of Manhattan's elite. But Donald had something else. He had audacity. He began cultivating a persona, not just a businessman, but a brand. He spoke in superlatives, painted visions of grandeur, and sold not only buildings, but the dream of Trump himself. When others played safe, Donald doubled down. When others whispered, Donald shouted. And slowly, people began to notice. But the Trump story is not only about ambition, it is also about inheritance. Fred Trump's fortune was not just measured in dollars, but in lessons. About bending systems, about pushing limits, about never conceding defeat. And behind closed doors, Fred gave his son more than advice. He gave him the seed capital, the financial lifeline, and the confidence that comes from knowing you'll never truly fall to the ground. Donald Trump would one day boast that he built his empire from a small loan of $1 million. But in truth, he inherited much more than money. He inherited a foundation of power, an empire in miniature, and a father's creed: always win. For Donald, failure was not an option, at least not one he would ever admit to. From the very beginning, the myth had to be protected. Image mattered more than reality. Perception was power. And Donald Trump, the boy from Queens, was about to turn perception into his most valuable currency. This is where the making of Trump truly begins. The leap from Queens to Manhattan. The transformation from son of a builder to the man who would try to build himself into an American legend. Donald Trump arrived in Manhattan like an ambitious outsider storming the gates of a kingdom that wasn't built for him. The old guard of New York real estate looked down on him. The boy from Queens who lacked their lineage, their networks, their polished restraint. But Trump was not here to blend in. He was here to dominate. His first big stage was the Commodore Hotel. Once a decaying property near Grand Central Terminal, it was an eyesore that few developers wanted to touch. But Trump saw opportunity where others saw risk. He negotiated a complex deal with the city, leveraging tax abatements and connections, convincing the Hyatt hotel chain to partner with him. In 1980, the Grand Hyatt opened its doors. Gleaming glass, bold design, and most importantly, the Trump name plastered across headlines. This was Donald Trump's arrival. It wasn't just about buildings anymore. It was about visibility. He understood something essential. In America, success is not only about what you build, but how loudly the world sees you building it. The 80s were an era made for Trump, a decade of excess, of Wall Street greed, of golden ambition without apology. Trump fit the times perfectly. He bought casinos in Atlantic City, expanded into hotels, condominiums, and high-rises, and everywhere he went, he attached one thing above all: his name. Trump Tower rose on Fifth Avenue in 1983, a shimmering monument not only to luxury, but to himself. With its marble atriums, cascading waterfalls, and gold-plated finishes, Trump Tower was more than real estate. It was a statement. Donald Trump had turned himself into a brand. He sold an image of power, success, and relentless victory. He cultivated a persona in the media, giving interviews, posing for magazine covers, and feeding a press corps that found him irresistible. He was brash, quotable, and never shy about proclaiming his own greatness. If others sought quiet dignity, Trump thrived on spectacle. But behind the shine of gold and glass, shadows lurked. His business empire was not as solid as he claimed. The casinos, the airlines, the yacht, many of these ventures bled money. Debt piled up. Bankers whispered about reckless spending and inflated claims. Yet Trump always found a way to spin the story. He painted losses as temporary, setbacks as victories in disguise. For him, reality was negotiable. What mattered was the performance. He wrote books, or rather, had them written in his voice. The Art of the Deal became a bestseller, cementing his myth as the ultimate negotiator. Millions of readers absorbed the gospel of Trump. Think big, fight hard, never admit weakness. The truth behind those deals, the complexity of bailouts and backroom arrangements, faded behind the shine of the narrative. Trump had mastered the art not only of the deal, but of storytelling. By the late 80s, Donald Trump was no longer just a developer. He was a celebrity. He was a fixture on talk shows, a subject of gossip columns, a man who relished being larger than life. For some, he symbolized the American dream itself, bold, unapologetic, hungry for more. For others, he was a walking caricature of greed. But love him or hate him, everyone was watching. And that was exactly the point. Trump understood something profound about America. That in a culture driven by image, perception could be more valuable than truth. If he could make people believe he was the greatest, then in a strange way, he already was. It is here that Donald Trump, the man, began to blur into Donald Trump, the myth. The line between businessman and brand dissolved. Success was not measured in profit, but in attention. And Trump, more than anyone, knew how to command it. The boy from Queens had done it. He had crossed the river, stormed the gates, and carved his name into Manhattan's skyline. Yet what he had built was more fragile than it appeared. Beneath the gold veneer, cracks were forming. The debts, the overreach, the unsustainable expansion, all of it threatened to bring the empire crashing down. But if Donald Trump had one defining quality, it was this. He never allowed the story to end in failure. He always found a way to reinvent himself, to rise again, to twist defeat into another chapter of victory. And soon, when the towers of business began to wobble, Trump would discover a new stage. A stage even bigger than Manhattan, brighter than any casino floor, more enduring than a glass tower. A stage that would broadcast his name into millions of homes across America. And it was there that Donald Trump would transform once again, not just from a businessman into a celebrity, but into a symbol. The 1990s were not kind to Donald Trump. Behind the shimmering facades of Trump Tower and the golden aura of success, his empire was collapsing. The casinos in Atlantic City, once hailed as monuments of luxury, bled money like open wounds. His airline failed. His grand yacht, a floating palace was sold. Banks circled like vultures, whispering about billions in debt. For a moment, the myth cracked. The magazines that once celebrated him now speculated about his downfall. The mighty Trump name seemed destined to fade into bankruptcy court. And yet, it did not. Because Trump had built something more resilient than his balance sheets. He had built himself into a character. A man so deeply entwined with fame that even failure could not erase him. Bankruptcy was not the end. It became another plot twist in the larger story of Donald Trump. He painted himself not as a man brought down by reckless deals, but as a fighter clawing his way back from the brink. America loves a comeback, and Trump knew how to script his own. The tabloids helped. Trump's personal life, from divorces to affairs, became a theater of scandal. His marriages to Ivana Trump, Marla Maples, and later Melania Knauss kept him in the spotlight. Each chapter, no matter how messy, fed the media machine. For most men, these scandals would have been ruin. For Trump, they were fuel. Every headline, whether praising or mocking, kept his name alive. But it wasn't until the early 2000s that Trump discovered his most powerful stage yet: television. NBC's The Apprentice debuted in 2004. Its premise was simple: contestants competing for a job with Trump, navigating business challenges, corporate games, and boardroom showdowns. But what made the show a cultural phenomenon was not the contestants. It was Trump himself. There he was, in a boardroom framed by sleek skyscraper views, sitting at the head of the table like a monarch of capitalism. He listened, he judged, and finally, he delivered the line that would echo across America: "You're fired." It was theatrical. It was ruthless. It was perfect television. For millions of viewers, Donald Trump became the ultimate boss, a man of power, decisiveness, and confidence. The show glossed over the failures, the debts, the complicated truth of his empire. Instead, it presented a carefully curated image: Donald Trump, the self-made billionaire, the master of the deal, the man who always won. Week after week, audiences absorbed this version of him, and soon it became reality in the minds of millions. The Apprentice did more than resurrect Trump's career. It rebranded him for a new generation. To young viewers who had never read about his bankruptcies, Trump was not a struggling real estate mogul. He was a television icon. His name was synonymous with success, his lifestyle with luxury, his authority unquestionable. The line between performance and truth blurred completely. The Trump character, once confined to New York tabloids, now lived in living rooms across America. And Trump, ever attuned to the value of image, leaned into it. He expanded his brand to everything from steaks to universities, selling not just products, but the illusion of access to his world of power. Many of these ventures would end in lawsuits, accusations of fraud, and controversy. But the controversies only added to the myth. For Trump, attention, good or bad, was the currency that never ran out. By the late 2000s, Donald Trump had accomplished something remarkable. He had failed in business, yet convinced millions he was the ultimate businessman. He had been mocked by elites, yet turned that mockery into publicity. He had built a new empire, not out of bricks and steel, but out of image, spectacle, and television. Donald Trump was no longer just a man. He was a brand. He was a persona. He was, in many ways, a character that America itself had created and embraced. But what happens when a character born for television steps into the real stage of politics? What happens when the myth collides with the machinery of democracy? That answer would come in 2015, when Donald Trump descended a golden escalator in Trump Tower and declared he was running for President of the United States. And the world would never look at him, or at America, the same way again. The summer of 2015, a golden escalator inside Trump Tower. Cameras waiting, journalists half amused, half curious. And then, there he was, Donald Trump, descending with Melania at his side. It was theater, and he knew it. For decades, Trump had mastered the art of entrances. But this time, the stage wasn't a casino or a reality show. It was politics. Few took him seriously. The announcement of his candidacy was met with laughter by pundits, dismissals by political elites. They saw it as another publicity stunt, another way to keep the Trump brand alive. But beneath the jokes, something stirred. His speech that day was blunt, incendiary, unapologetic. He railed against immigration, trade deals, Washington insiders. He spoke in simple, forceful words that bypassed the polish of politics. And while elites sneered, crowds listened. For many Americans, Trump's voice sounded like anger they already carried in their hearts. Anger at factories that had closed, at politicians who had promised change and delivered little, at a system that seemed designed for everyone but them. Trump gave that anger a face, a name, a rallying cry. He was not polished, not scripted. He was raw, unfiltered, and, to his supporters, real. The campaign became a spectacle unlike any America had seen. Trump filled arenas with energy more like a rock concert than a political rally. His slogans, "Make America Great Again," "Build the Wall," "Drain the Swamp," cut through complexity with blunt clarity. They were not policies, they were emotions, and emotions win elections. The media, which had once mocked him, couldn't look away. Every outrageous statement, every insult, every promise of glory became a headline. Networks broadcast his rallies in full, chasing ratings. Trump dominated the news cycle, not by playing by the rules, but by breaking them. He turned controversy into fuel, scandal into spotlight. As the primaries unfolded one by one, his rivals fell. Experienced governors, senators, polished politicians, all undone by a man who had never held office, who insulted them on debate stages, who rewrote the playbook as he went. By the summer of 2016, the impossible had become reality. Donald Trump was the Republican nominee for President of the United States. The establishment recoiled. Political analysts predicted a landslide defeat. How could a man with no political experience, burdened by scandals, loathed by much of the press, ever win against Hillary Clinton? A figure with decades of experience and the full machinery of the Democratic Party behind her? But the polls missed something. They missed the silent anger in forgotten towns, the quiet desperation of families who felt invisible, the cultural resentment of those who believed America had left them behind. Trump spoke directly to them. He told them he saw them. He promised to fight for them. And they believed him. November 8th, 2016. The world watched as the impossible unfolded. State by state, the map turned red in places long considered unwinnable for Republicans. Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania. The so-called blue wall crumbled. By midnight, the laughter that had greeted Trump's candidacy had turned into stunned silence. Donald Trump, the reality television star, the brash businessman from Queens, had been elected the 45th President of the United States. For his supporters, it was vindication. The forgotten had spoken. The elites had been humbled. The system had been shaken to its core. For his critics, it was a nightmare. A man they saw as unfit for office was now the most powerful leader in the world. But beyond the shock, beyond the celebrations and the despair, one truth was undeniable. Donald Trump had changed American politics forever. He had torn down the old rules, rewritten the script, and proven that in the age of media, personality could be more powerful than policy. Donald Trump had won, and now the world would learn what it meant when the character stepped into the Oval Office. The Oval Office is not a stage built for improvisation. It is a place of history, of careful words and measured gestures. But when Donald Trump entered it, The rules that had governed American politics for generations were shattered in an instant. From the very first day, he declared war on convention. His inaugural speech was not one of unity, but of defiance. He painted a picture of American carnage, a nation ravaged by crime, betrayal, and decline. To his critics, it sounded dark, divisive, almost apocalyptic. To his supporters, it was the truth finally spoken aloud. The Trump presidency had begun, not as continuity, but as rupture. His style was unlike any president before him. Where others spoke with caution, Trump tweeted with abandon. In 280 characters, he bypassed the filters of the press, reaching tens of millions directly. Every morning, the world woke not to policy briefings, but to Trump's unfiltered stream of thought. Praise for allies, attacks on enemies, boasts, threats, and slogans. For his followers, it was authenticity. For his critics, it was chaos.
This chapter is quite lengthy, so I have divided it into 2 parts. Please stay tuned for part 2.